Ships of Discovery. Ships of Discovery. Focus question. How did changes in ship design over time affect human exploration and knowledge? Introduction. People often settle along rivers, lakes, and seas. Long ago, people who lived near large bodies of water were curious about what was beyond the horizon. They also thought that traveling over water might be easier than traveling over land. These thoughts led to someone making a simple boat. As boats and ships became more practical, people were able to travel further from home. New types of boats were an improvement over the previous boats. They often were safer, carried more cargo, and were more comfortable. Up until about 150 years ago, boats were the main means of carrying goods and people from place to place. Let's look at how boats were used to explore the world and how they have changed over time. Early years. The oldest record of sea travel comes from Egypt. More than 6,000 years ago, Egyptians took to the water. They built boats by carving out the trunks of trees, but the Egyptians were not the only people to make boats from trees. Many other cultures that looked for ways to cross the water also carved boats from trees. These were sturdy boats, but they couldn't carry very much. Over time, people wanted to move larger things over waterways. They wanted to build boats to carry many people. They also wanted to be able to carry food, animals, and other items to trade. Canoes made from oak trees were good boats for crossing a lake or going down a river. However, they didn't work as well for carrying large things. Imagine trying to row a canoe across a lake with 6 sheep cramped around you. The space just wasn't big enough. Humans have always been driving to improve things, so it was natural that long ago people looked for ways to build bigger, faster, and safer boats. People also realized that they needed better boats to explore places far from their homeland. The next step is boat building. In boat building was using wooden beams to make a frame. The frame was then covered with wooden planks or bark from trees. Some cultures even used animal skins stretched over the frame. These boats were larger and more streamlined and able to hold more cargo. The Egyptians were the first to cover a wooden frame with long flat pieces of wood to create a hole, the outer shell of a boat. Some of their boats were as long as 21.3 meters, 70 feet. The Egyptians were also the first to use sails. Sails reduced the need for people to row the boats. Some larger boats used both rowers and sails. Soon, the Greeks and other peoples around the Mediterranean Sea were building large boats powered by sails. About 3,000 years ago, sailing ships were built with two masts, each one carrying a sail. The addition of a second mate made the ships easier to steer and also made them much safer. 500 years later, the Greeks developed a ship with 4 sails. Some of the fastest ships at the time were built for battle. Some warships had as many as 3 levels of rowers on each side. These larger ships also allowed people to travel and explore distant places. During this period, exploration and trade moved beyond the Mediterranean Sea. The Polynesians. In the South Pacific, groups of Pacific Island peoples were building boats that could sail in the open ocean. Over 3,500 years ago, these people were traveling east, well beyond the islands where they lived. They also explored areas of the Asian mainland. These Polynesian sailors built a boat that was an early version of the modern catamaran. They took 2 canoes and connected them using large wooden poles. A deck was then built to span the poles. These boats were usually about 15 to 18 meters, 50 to 60 feet long. The central deck held masts for sails and had enough space for several people and their supplies during a long voyage. These early boats provided a means of safe travel from one island to another. The Polynesians settled each new island they discovered. By the beginning of the year 1000 CE, they lived on nearly every island that could find in the Pacific Ocean. Their new homes included Hawaii, New Zealand, and Rapa Nui, Easter Island. Rapa Nui. The Polynesians were skilled sailors. They became so familiar with the ocean that they could tell their location by the size and shape of the waves. They could easily travel great distances by going from island to island. The Polynesians grew to expect sea travel as a way of life. Vikings also built warships known as longships. It often was difficult to tell if a longship was coming or going because it looked the same in the front and in the back. Using this design, Viking attackers could easily change direction. Longships were able to travel as fast as 15 knots. A knot is a way to measure speed on water. Some of the larger longships carried as many as 200 warriors. The combination of large, speedy, easy-to-handle ships and a fierce fighting spirit led the Vikings sought to defeat. The Vikings ruled the ocean for nearly 3 centuries. Age of Discovery. Until the 1400s, most sailors still kept close to their home waters. But with the coming of the Age of Discovery, things changed dramatically. Every European sailing country wanted to find new lands. The race was on, and the Americans were the prize. Shipbuilders had to find ways to build faster and safer ships. In the 1400s and 1500s, sea explorers used small, sturdy ships known as caravels. These ships had 3 masts to carry sails. This design made the ships fast and easy to steer. Caravels had square sails on the front and the middle masts and a triangular-shaped sail on the back mast. Consider the Concorde. What impact did these discoveries have on the people already living in these places? Too often, the effect was a tragic one. Christopher Columbus, Hernan Cortes, and other Europeans who led these expeditions often exploited both the land and people they found. Their motivate was usually greeted. Before long, ships would also be used to carry people across oceans and enslave them far from their homes. Christopher Columbus sailed 3 of these ships. The largest was 27.4 meters, 90 feet long, and 9.1 meters, 30 feet wide. Compared to modern ocean liners and cargo ships, caravels were tiny. But even though they were quite small, the explorer Ferdinand Magellan set out to sail 5 carnivals around the world with a crew of 260 sailors. Almost 3 years after they began the trip, one of Magellan's ships and 18 of the original crew members made it around the world. Magellan was not one of the survivors. He was killed somewhere in the Philippine Islands. The Chinese. While European explorers were sailing the world, the Chinese had also taken to the sea in another part of the world. They were skilled sailors. Their most famous explorer, Zhang He, traveled in a fleet of 62 ships that were much larger than European ships. His largest ship was so big that it could had held all 3 of Columbus's ships on its deck. This huge ship was 121 meters, 400 feet long, and 35.7 meters, 150 feet wide. In addition to the 62 main trading ships, more than 100 smaller support boats were in the fleet. These Chinese explorers sailed all the way to Africa to trade. However, war with their Asian neighbors caused the Chinese to turn their attention away from exploration. Do you know? Christopher Columbus's entire crew was about 90 sailors on the 3 ships. The Chinese explorer Zhang He had more than 162 ships and 30,000 sailors on one of his voyages. Later years. As sea exploration continued, the Spanish led the way. By the 1500s, European ship design had improved. The newest ships, called galleons, were larger, faster, and more comfortable. These vessels were as long as 32.7 meters, 140 feet, but were still small compared to the Chinese ships. Many of them had nice, comfortable living quarters. Galleons were capable of serving both as trading vessels and warships. Because of their size, galleons were able to carry many cannons on board, making them dangerous in battle. In the late 1700s, British Captain James Cook undertook some of the greatest explorations on his time. On his first ship, Endeavour, Cook sailed around the world. His ship was only 32 meters, 105 feet in length. It was smaller than many other ships and had a shallow hold, sitting only 4.3 meters, 14 feet deep when fully loaded. Cook was an intelligent explorer and a great sailor who also knew how to keep his crew healthy. He made them eat certain foods such as limes and cabbages to remain free from disease. Until Cook's time, up to one-half of the crew on a long voyage would die of scurvy or other diseases. Cook knew his success as an explorer depended on keeping his crew healthy. Conclusion: by the middle of the 1800s, sailors had explored and mapped most of the world's coasts. As people settled farther from their homelands, better ships were needed to move people and supplies great distances. Fast ships called clipper ships carried people across oceans in a matter of days. Some of these ships had as many as 35 sails. In only a few years, however, the steam engine would replace wind power, ending the age of sailing ships. When we look back at some of the ships used by early explorers, we had to admire the skill of the people who designed those ships of discovery. Setting sail into the unknown helped create the world we know today.